call is a little bit different than a lot of our others because we've invited members of our Illinois Workforce Innovation Board, members of the local workforce boards, as well as chief elected officials, because it is their duty and obligation to be a part of this process of developing criteria for certification. Many of you will recall that several weeks or even months back, we contacted everyone to join in those discussions. We developed a work group. We have several individuals from the state and local board as well as CEOs. But I do want to reiterate, after this call, we'll be continuing those discussions. And if any of you individuals would like to join in those discussions, we certainly would welcome you joining in further. Some of the housekeeping items, especially for those that are new to this, if you want to make a comment during the presentation, you need to do that in the chat pod to your left. We will have an opportunity throughout the presentation where we'll open up the phone lines and allow those chief elected officials and board members to provide comments over the phone, but anyone else should be providing their input during the chat pod, and we will respond as necessary. Also, we will gather all of those and take those to the next work group meeting for further discussion and further revisions to these criteria. If you are looking for the documents that will be used today, the files pod in your bottom left corner are where we have 3 different documents. We'll be using the PowerPoint presentation only today. The other documents will support the information. And so you might want to download those. If you're on the call, you may want to mute your phones so that background noise when we do open up the telephone lines doesn't interfere with the discussion. If you're on your computer, please mute your speakers at this time. I do ask that you not put us on hold, as sometimes that will put a music background, and then we won't be able to overcome that with our discussions. Today's webinar, as I mentioned, is really to get input on the information that will be provided. We'll be looking for comments and questions for consideration. If we can, we'll answer those questions immediately, but for the most part, we'll be taking them back to the work group. So if we don't answer your question or respond to your comment, it isn't because we're not addressing it at this, it's just that we're not addressing it at this time. I do want to welcome 2 of our presenters today. We have Diana Robinson with Northern Illinois University. She will be presenting on the One-Stop Center certification, and Lisa Jones with the Department of Commerce will be presenting on the One-Stop Procurement process. And so I want to turn it over to Diana at this time where she can go through the certification information. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Mark, and good morning, everyone. I do have a question. How do we advance the slides? Is that something, Mark, that you or Chelsea do, or can I control that from my computer?
You should be able to control it, Diana, in the bottom left. You'll see a couple arrows. And,
got it. Okay. I'm good. That's the only question I have answered.
I will.
Okay.
Yeah, before you get started, Diana, just again, if you haven't completed the poll, please do. We will be removing that here in the next couple of minutes and expanding the actual PowerPoint presentation. So thank you again, Diana, for joining us.
You bet. And very much appreciate the opportunity to share the important work that the One-Stop Certification Policy Group has been doing. I'll provide a little background on the project before getting into the actual recommendations. And I wanted you to note, especially our CEOs and board members on this first slide, there are a couple of legislative references there. And if you haven't looked at them, they really do make for interesting reading. And they provide important insights into the Department of Labor's philosophy behind this legislation. So if you have an opportunity to take a look at that, it's a great background for the work that we've all been doing here. I'm going to spend most of my time on the recommendations of the work group. As Mark said, we are particularly interested in feedback from state and local board members and the chief elected officials on the work that we've done to date. I'm happy to say that we've had excellent participation by local directors and staff who have always benefited from their input, and we appreciate their willingness to share their expertise with us. So we will, at the end of this presentation, make sure that we take all the comments and feedback from you back to the work group, and we'll figure out how to incorporate that in our path forward. All right, so let's get into this. So under WIOA, all state workforce boards are required to develop a process for certifying their one-stops. Some state workforce boards have been doing this for a number of years under WIA. Illinois has not, so we're developing this process anew. The IWIB is responsible for developing the process, but it must occur in consultation with the CEOs and the board chairs and members, and that's why we're stressing so much that we really want their feedback on this. So in terms of the history of this group, when the Department of Labor extended the timeline for having its one-stops certified, the IWIB responded here in Illinois by creating its first policy work group. And members included IWIB members, and I'll just mention a few folks because everyone's time is valuable and appreciated, but especially our board members and CEOs. Mike Massey and Arthur Bishop have been representing the IWIB. We've had Joe Van from Mercer County, who's representing a chief elected official. And then we've had a local board chair, Eric Christians, from the Springfield area, who's also been participating. We've had reps from our 3 core agency partners, which include Employment Security, the Community College Board, and the Department of Human Services Rehab Services. And then finally, as I mentioned, a number of local workforce area directors and one-stop center managers. So we very much appreciate the time and the insight that they've been sharing. It's been a very challenging assignment in terms of both scope and the timeline, which has been short. So my role with this project has been to serve as a facilitator. The work group members are the experts, and now we're bringing your ideas and insights to the process. So this is the approach that the policy work group came to as we discussed how we wanted to tackle this project. The overriding consideration of the work group is that the centers in Illinois need to be certified, actually throughout the country, need to be certified by July 1st of this year. We wanted to develop a tool and a process that gets everyone certified, but we also don't want to compromise on quality. So our objective was really to balance compliance issues with a continuous improvement approach. And at the end of the day, much of what is needed, our centers are already doing. But the main difference is that for the first time, their one-stop practices will be comprehensively documented and reviewed, and that tends to make people a little nervous, even those who are doing a great job. So we considered criteria from other states, and we settled on Kentucky's model as one that set very high standards for their one-stops. So we reviewed all of Kentucky's process and their criteria and how they measured them, and we selected what fit best in Illinois. Quite honestly, because this initial certification process is on such a short fuse, we captured most of those improvement opportunities as possibilities to consider for future certification rounds. It's not feasible to expect much in the way of innovation for this initial certification, but we did want to be aware of potential directions that our one-stops could be moving in. So there were 3 very practical considerations that surfaced as we began to discuss what's feasible and what's desirable in Illinois' one-stops. The first one is a recognition that the relationships among our one-stop partners, especially our core agencies, is that of voluntary collaboration. And there's really not much, if anything, that we can do or would want to do, quite frankly, in terms of requiring that they do certain things. This is about how do we build a culture of collaboration and cooperation. Secondly, is that collective bargaining agreements are in place that limit the criteria that we're developing that involve governmental employees. Their work conditions are established, and we can't really expect that there is much movement in that arena. And then finally, there are serious resource constraints. we can't expect one-stop centers to undertake costly improvements that simply aren't in their budget. So again, if the certification process reveals that significant investments need to be made, those will have to come in future years as we identify where those resources might be from. So the criteria, the document, if you've been able to download it, really has two major components. The first one is, well, three. The first are these broad categories of criteria, and these are here on the slide. Effectiveness, accessibility and infrastructure, more the physical assets of the centers, as well as ensuring that all customers have access to service. And then finally, continuous improvement, and we'll be going through the criteria in each of those areas. So we're having the broad categories, the actual criteria, and then the evidence that we're suggesting that local workforce boards use to determine whether or not a particular criterion has been met. And we're calling them suggested criteria because there may be opportunities for local workforce areas and boards to identify different evidence or indicators that they think more accurately reflects how they've met that particular criterion. So we recognize that this is still a work in progress, and we will continue to look for better ways to approach this. We also, let's see. Yeah, the timeline here is that we want to have the work group essentially sign off on their recommendations and have us then submit that document to the IWEB Executive Committee by early February so they can review it carefully, make their changes, and make a decision about how to move forward. The next steps in this process will be to then take those criteria and transform them into the tools that will be used on site to support the certification process. So the first group of criteria fall under the area of effectiveness. You can see that there are 9 areas here, and we're going to go through each of them individually. And we're going to keep it at a pretty high level. If you go back to that document, which is, I think, just about 5 pages, that provides a lot more detail. But in order for us to get through this in a reasonable amount of time, I'll be kind of speaking a little more generally about the kinds of criteria that belong under each one of these areas. So the first criterion is governance. And this can probably be accomplished largely kind of by a desk review to ensure that the key documents that ensure that that all of the WIOA requirements are in place, as well as those of the one-stops. And by the way, we're focusing only on the comprehensive one-stops in the state, the 29 one-stops that are available in each of the local workforce areas. So the Memorandum of Understanding describes how the partners will provide the integrated services. The CEO agreement, if it's applicable, describes the roles and process for appointing your board members, and of course the certification of your LWIB, and then that the board members are current and the required documentation is in place. The second bullet is a key one that Lisa will be addressing after this presentation, which is to ensure that the one-stop operator is in place by July 1st of this year. And then finally, that a functional organizational chart has been created that reflects the reporting relationships for center staff. This is something that our CEO and board members thought was very important. It's really kind of a chain of command document that allows the public and the board members to see the various reporting relationships of the participating agencies in the one-stops. The next criterion in the effectiveness group is professional staffing, and that's very high up in this list of criteria because obviously the people working at the one-stops are the most important component of effectiveness. So we want to know that staff from each agency have job descriptions in place, that they're regularly evaluated by their supervisors, and that they have access to training so that they're able to execute their job responsibilities. to the best possible level. And this is one of those key challenges of WIOA that I mentioned a little bit earlier, and that's how one-stop management can hold staff accountable when there are very different reporting lines. And again, that collective bargaining agreement comes into place because it does establish the workplace conditions. And so we need to be very careful about what we can ask of partner agencies. And this will be one of the major challenges of the one-stop operators as they're being put in place. So these two examples just illustrate how during this first round of certification, we're going to be learning a lot about what's possible, and we'll make refinements as we go forward. So the third criterion is responsiveness to the needs of job seekers. And this is twinned with the next one, which is responsiveness to the needs of employers. But we're taking this one first. There's a lot of overlap in these. So for the initial certification, we're going to rely on the MOU and the service matrix to describe what services are available at the one-stops. And we're also going to need to know that these services are being provided in a variety of ways, whether it's at the one-stop, whether it's through online resources, or whether it's through satellite locations throughout the community that help job seekers access the resources they need. So one of the certification challenges that we've been wrestling with is we can use those documents to identify what services are being offered, but it's a little trickier to actually document how those are being offered. It's one thing to see it in writing, but it's another thing to go on site and try to determine that indeed all of these services are being made available to the job seekers. But we do, just one more point in there, the job seeker activity and feedback, which is related to being responsive. We're going to talk about that under continuous improvement criteria. All right. The responsiveness to the needs of business. Here again, we're focused on what needs to be in place for initial certification. And the focus here is on documenting that a knowledgeable business service team is in place, that the staff are knowledgeable, that a menu of business services is available, for example, incumbent worker training or registered apprenticeships or on-the-job training. There are a variety of training options. And that then information is reported back to the local workforce board about their activities and successes and challenges. This is an excellent opportunity for our CEOs and board members and businesses to provide us with feedback on their needs and what they expect of one-stops for successful business services as we move forward. It's also true, I should have mentioned, same thing with job seekers, is we will be looking to our local boards and our IWIB for suggestions of what they expect in terms of responsiveness to the needs of job seekers as well. So performance. A number of these criteria will require that the state has certain pieces in place. And one is that the performance goals have been negotiated for each local workforce area and that the performance reporting expectations are clear. So for the initial certification, the focus here is on having a center staff understand that the local workforce area is responsible for meeting those performance goals and helping them understand the role that they play in making that happen. So a highly effective one-stop will help all partner agencies address their respective performance goals as well as the WIOA ones. So as we move a little closer to implementing these certification tools, we'll have to keep a close eye on where we are in these performance reporting requirements and make sure that we're asking the one-stops to be certified using information that's in place and readily available. There will be some instances as we move through this that we simply won't be able to measure a given criterion, and we're going to have to just push that into the next certification round. But we're going to try to figure out as much as we can in order to have it in place by July 1st. All right, program coordination. A major aim of WIOA and of WIOA and all the earlier legislation is to provide integrated programs and services and activities. And this criterion addresses that aim by looking for ways in which the partner agencies collaborate to meet customer needs, both job seekers and employers. So we're looking for evidence that frontline staff will have the training, access to the training that they need to quickly connect customers to the needed resources. And this is another example of a criterion that the local boards will need to revisit after the initial certifications. So what standards of collaboration and service integration do they want to see, and can they agree to with their core partners? Here in operational coordination, the focus here is on operational efficiency. We want to ensure that the customers, their needs are assessed quickly, that they're identified accurately, and that they're connected swiftly to the services and resources that they need. We are asking that the staff closest to service delivery and who understand the processes very well are able to offer improvement suggestions to management, and that the resource room, which, by the way, is in quotation marks because very often there isn't a dedicated room, that space constraints prevent that from happening, but there is a space within the resource center that allows customers to have a relatively quiet and private space, but that the material available in that area is up to date and useful, and that finally the publicly facing information, whether it's in the service matrix or the website or other places, that it all says the same thing and that it's up to date. And then service hours. This is a core requirement in order to be effective. You need to make sure that your customers obviously have access to the services. And here again, one-stops may be limited in the services that they can staff based on collective bargaining in terms of what hours they can require staff to keep, which can be a problem for customers whose lives can't accommodate regular business hours. So we ask that the LWIB have a conversation about what the center hours should be, and to the extent feasible, that those hours are kept in a manner that's convenient for both job seekers and employers. Equal opportunity access is something that everyone on this call is probably intimately familiar with. Its access is a core principle of WIOA, and it runs through all of these certification criteria. Federal and state law has long required equal access, and WIOA is no exception. It requires that every customer have equal access to services. Assistive technology can be very helpful in this regard. It can help customers with a variety of physical or learning disabilities access information about services, and that can in turn require special purpose computers and software, ranging from that sort of technology to just the way that the center is configured so that wheelchairs can move through the space. Obviously, again, resource constraints affect the ability to offer these kinds of accommodations, but human ingenuity and best practices can go a long way. So we'll address this again in the next section, but the point here is that to the extent that the center can make equal access come true for every customer is really the main objective here. All right, so we have gotten through the first section of criteria on effectiveness. And Chelsea, if you can unmute the lines, we can take some feedback and comments.
Thanks, Diana. While we have those phones unmuted and allow people to just make some comments or ask some questions over the phone, I wanted to comment on a couple things. The criteria document that is on the files pod will be continuously updated as discussions go on. So we'll talk a little bit later about where you can find this webinar and documents on the Illinois WorkNet site. You'll want to check back there, and we'll provide emails that indicate when these are updated. So what you have today may not be the final product. And all of these criteria that Diana's going over as mentioned to start this, we're working through the process of developing them. So really, they're recommendations that will go to the board as opposed to thinking these are final items. Some of these are mandatory if you look at the standards regulations. So some we will not be able to remove, but we certainly want to leave all of them up for discussion in our continued work group meetings. So anything, like I said, is up for discussion and comment if you have any that you want to present today. Also, Diana will be providing an email number or email address that you can send comments later. We're giving you an awful lot of information today, and so you may want to have a little bit of time to go back to the slides and other additional information, and then maybe come up with some questions or comments, and you'll want to email those to her. And then finally, one other thing, I just want to reiterate, especially the business slide that Diana went over. We're really looking for input from businesses, the CEOs and local boards, to ensure that the centers are designed to fit their needs. And so we will really harp on that as these discussions go on, that we get input from all of those individuals. So with that, if you could please, if you have any questions or comments you want to make over the telephone lines, those should be unmuted at this time. Please do so there, or continue to present your questions in the chat pod. Thank you.
So this is Tom Hacker.
Good morning, Tom. Thank you for joining us today.
Sure. So as we're talking about the one-stops engaging with the employer community, how are the one-stops going to do that? How are they going to make the employer community know that they exist, where they exist? Is there any sort of marketing or outreach assistance or parameters or help that is going to ensure that the one-stops are able to engage the employer community that they're trying to serve?
Yeah, Tom, a couple things there. That, again, goes back to our comment of looking for your thoughts on how best that to do. All of our local areas do business outreach, but certainly if the businesses and organizations in their area think there could be some additional activities or avenues for those discussions, we would like to hear those and have an ability to look through those. Your question has certainly been on the table for this work group as to how that best can be handled. If you look at local areas, any of us throughout the state works in one of the local areas, their local plan should be addressing that as to how it's happening now, and as they build to the future and provide revisions to those or new local plans as they're required on a regular basis. Certainly businesses and organizations should be providing input to make updates as necessary to ensure that it's an effective process. But our work group will certainly take that question and has already had that, again, on the table for future discussions. We kind of identified the criteria as the first set of discussions, and as we continue those meetings, we'll dig deeper into each of these criteria and some of those other items as you've asked. Any other comments by telephone?
Hi, this is Snyder in Springfield, and I had a question about effectiveness for professional staffing. That slide that talks about having a trained professional staff at your one-stop, and then you're talking about the basics of job description, and you mentioned evaluations. Now, I'm wondering, as we have many partners that are going to be coming to our center and, maybe working like one day a week or however we arrange it, are you talking about individual performance evaluation of the staff that are here, or are you talking mainly about the center evaluations and how we're, as a team, moving forward with serving our customers?
It's an overall evaluation. We're ensuring that the system in place is working for the customers and businesses. So, no, it's not necessarily looking at an individual basis, their overall job duties. However, and correct me, Diane, I think it would somewhat bring into some of their activities as they relate to the actual services being provided to ensure that those, that they're getting to the customer in an effective and efficient manner. And that's been part of the discussion in the first several meetings. We know it's issues. Diana mentioned that there's labor concerns that we have to work through. So many of these items may not be able to put in place as definitive items in this initial phase because of things that we have to work through. But certainly there are minimum criteria that are going to come out of these discussions that everyone will have to comply with. And so, again, work group will continue to review that information and come up with recommendations as to best address them.
Just to add to what Mark said, one of the suggestions that the work group had identified was that the supervisors or the agencies, the core agency partners, provide the one-stop operator or the center manager just with assurances and a timetable of when their staff are evaluated to make sure that that's happening. It's a kind of a basic accountability issue, just to make sure that someone is kind of keeping track of their job responsibilities and to ensure that they're being they're occurring.
Hi, this is Lisa. I'd just like to, we've got some comments in the chat pod, and Dolores, that's a very good point that you raise about internal or external and aligning with the regions. I know that conversation has been more around business services at the local level, but certainly there has to be a business strategy at the regional level. And I would really appreciate it if you could maybe engage in those discussions to help us think through how that would best be put in place, because Tom, one of our IWIB members, is pointing out a concern that we all know that's expressed in the business community about there being just one point of contact.
Correct.
And so I think, that's definitely an issue, and why we want to really reinforce that we need the CEOs and, the board chairs and businesses to really help us craft this so we ensure we're meeting that.
Yeah, I would be delighted to be a part of that conversation.
Great. And then, John, our chair of our state board, he has raised a really good suggestion that we might want to discuss at the work group level around private sector advisory boards. And I would also suggest that we work with ICCB, because as part of career and technical education, they already have in place business advisory councils to help develop those career and tech ed programs. So that might be a resource that we could consider looking into. And we are having some conversations with ICCB about that, but I just want to, thinking about ways that we can engage more with business, I'd like to offer that opportunity.
I want to make sure I reiterate when we talked about who's on these work groups. So Dolores, for you, we have someone from your organization on the work group. All of the 4 core partners have one representative at least on the work group. We have representatives from the local state board CEOs. We have representatives from the local workforce areas. So if you have, comments and questions that you feel need further discussed, reach out to the individuals from your entity and organizations and have those discussed and bring those to us as a work group, specifically to Diana to bring to the work group, so that we ensure to maintain a continuous conversation of your needs and your concerns.
Or my perspective from the private industry, which would also work. Yeah. Okay, certainly.
Yeah, absolutely, Dolores. And I do think, just to make sure, we'll let you know when the next meeting is, because and carve out some time on the agenda just to talk about this.
Okay, fine. Thank you.
And this is Mike from Commerce. To add to that conversation, I foresee the need for coordinated outreach and services that go on the road to businesses, but we also will need to have staff that are based in the center that could provide services or referrals to walk-in business customers.
Absolutely.
Because hopefully the workforce, not the workforce, but the one-stop center becomes a place where businesses know they can go to get assistance or get referrals. So it'll be a two-pronged approach in the way I think it would work. But again, that remains to be worked out with all the partners, but something to consider as we go forward.
Okay, any other comments before we move to the next section of Diana's presentation? And certainly you can continue. I see people continuing to type. We'll go ahead and move on, Diana, and anyone that has any additional comments, please put them in the chat pod, and we'll have another break at the end of Diana's presentation for the next couple of areas of certification. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Mark, and thanks, everybody. As Mark indicated, we'll be taking a very careful look at all of your comments, and if you want to get them in over the next few days, that would be wonderful, too. Give you some time to reflect. All right, so our next category of criteria have to do with accessibility and infrastructure. Let's just move into them. First one is the physical layout, and we've touched on this under the ADA and ensuring all services are available to customers. But this focuses on the location of the center and its layout to ensure that, again, all the ADA requirements have been met, which it's probably safe to bet that centers have already addressed those just to stay in business and receive federal funding. Mentioned that the resource room or the equivalent space provides some privacy for customers, and that the technology is available to support customer needs, especially job seekers. So are the computers operating, and can Skype be supported, and is a fax machine available, and other basic technology can be used by the customer. All right. The issue of center location is recognizes that many customers, especially job seekers, rely on public transportation. And so one stop should be located as conveniently as possible in light of that. There we have this definition of what a reasonable distance is. We also want to make sure that the signage is clear and readable from a distance. And then finally, that parking is available for folks who access the center by car. The ability to meet some of these requirements will potentially be high-ticket items if they're not in compliance. So here's another instance where we're going to have to look beyond the initial certification to figure out how we can address some of these requirements if they're not currently working. Center appearance and safety. So these are all pretty basic and obvious. We did have some conversation among the work group about what professional in appearance means and how LWIBs can address that in light of collective bargaining. The example came up that in some offices, certain staff are wearing business attire while others are wearing jeans. And that conveys a message to customers. And a number of the board members and even one-stop center managers would like the ability to be able to set and enforce a dress code. But again, we have to figure out what's practical given some of these constraints. So this could be one of those issues that our local board members and CEOs may be very helpful in addressing. Common identifiers. This discussion is still unfolding at the state level, so it's not yet clear exactly what will be required. We do know that the American Job Center brand is required by law to be on the One-Stop Center signage and products. So there's not much leeway in that regard. However, what we're still grappling with is what do we do about some of the other logos and brands that have been developed over the past several years. We have the Illinois WorkNet logo. Some local centers have their own brand. So signage could get a little bit crowded if we try to get everything up there. So we need to figure out what, in the minimum, must be in place. And also, how far down on center products and materials can we expect that logo to be present? Program services. The first bullet point says it all. Again, this is one of those themes that appears several times in these criteria because all customers need to have the opportunity to access all resources they are eligible. So for job seekers, this could include a job search, resume writing, eligibility determination. It's just ensuring that access is in place. What we've got right now in terms of evidence is basically the local service agreement and the MOU. I'm sorry, the local service matrix and the MOU. And we're going to be relying on those documents fairly heavily in this initial certification round as evidence that these things are taking place. The more difficult criterion to measure is equal access, and to figure out how we demonstrate that equal access is occurring. So your suggestions are encouraged and very welcome on that front. Another requirement in the law is direct linkage, and basically what that means is providing a direct connection at the one-stop within a reasonable time, either by phone or through a real-time web-based communication, to a program staff member who can provide the needed information or services to the customer. So this criterion looks at ensuring that staff understand the requirements associated with this and that the technology is in place to deliver on it. The rest of these bullet points really are just reinforcing some of the aspects of other criteria that we've mentioned before. Again, focusing on accessibility and infrastructure. What we're looking at here is the focus on barriers to employment. So ensuring that the one-stops make every effort to accommodate individuals with barriers no matter what they are. People with disabilities is certainly a category that has a lot of supportive legislation and resources, but we also need to think about, for example, customers who might not have English as their first language or who have literacy barriers. So ensuring that materials are translated to at least Spanish, potentially more languages depending on where the one-stop is, or having materials written at a literacy level that's accessible by these customers is very important. And then finally, ensuring that center staff know about this requirement and are conversant with the kinds of accommodations that need to be provided. Actually, this is, we just covered the accessibility and infrastructure criteria. I think we can open up the phone lines again to see if you have questions or suggestions at this point.
Okay, thanks, Diana. I want to address a couple of the questions and then a couple of the slides you went through. To John Rico's point about the location of our centers and both comprehensive affiliate, we have different levels of centers out there, John, and everyone else that's not familiar with all of our local areas, and certainly, especially when you get outside of Chicago and Collier County area, there are definitely customers that are going to be 20 miles and more away from a local area facility that they can go to. So part of the discussion is certainly providing information, and Diana mentioned it, via technology, making sure a phone number is available to call in to see where I can get it. And so that's part of the discussion. All materials and services have to be available to all customers by all methods so that they do have that access at all times. As far as the signage goes, just to clarify that, we, as Diana said, many years ago, we branded Illinois as Illinois WorkNet system and Illinois WorkNet centers, and people went through the process of doing all of their signage and paperwork and all that. And so here we are again doing it again, at least with the addition of AJC, the American Job Centers. But really the technical part of it is what's still being discussed. Nothing that we know has been changed necessarily from Illinois WorkNet being our state branding or logo, so nothing should change. I guess what I want to make a point of is nobody should go out and start changing their signs right away. until the state comes down with a final determination as to what should be on signs, because there's all size of the logos, where does it have to be on a sign, where does it have to be on papers and documents, how large should they be? I mean, we've been through this in the past, and so we just are going through that process at the state level again, and so kind of sit tight with spending any resources right now until you get a little bit further indication as to how that should look. But we do know AJC is going to be added to everything as we've done with the Illinois WorkNet logo. So hopefully, John, that helps identify that, we do have customers out in a lot of remote areas, and we are designing a system at the state level through this process, but also through partner discussions at the interagency level on how this can work for everybody. Yeah, and then Mike Massey's made a comment to, basically this is all working together. We have to figure out the best ways for everybody to work together, have these discussions, ensuring that all levels, the state agencies, the local area staff and administrators, all of our boards and CEOs and businesses are all included in those discussions and ensuring everybody's needs and requirements, requests are being met. Anyone on the phone want to have some comments now?
Hey, Mark, this is Mike Shear.
Hi, Mike.
Okay, recently, or really this week, we're going through our EO and ADA and accessibility compliance review by DCO. And is that something that they're going to be involved with when they're certifying our one-stops, or is this going to be a separate thing going on? And then also, when they were here, they wanted to know if the Illinois WorkNet website was 508 approved.
I'll answer the second one because it's the easier one. Illinois WorkNet is approved. Everything, if you follow the website on a regular basis, you'll see that everything is designed to be accommodable to all devices. So you can go on there and see the information on a laptop, on a desktop, on a tablet, on phones. It all adjusts properly. To my knowledge, everything should be compliant with all those requirements. If anyone does see that they get to a page and it isn't, please ensure you're letting Illinois WorkNet staff know that so that they can correct it. To the first question, as far as your EO officers, and I'm going to speak to a couple things. One thing to make clear is we get confused with a couple of those acronyms. There's an EO officer and an EEO officer, and what we're talking about is the equal opportunity, so just EO officers. They have to do regular checks of the facilities and documents and things of that nature, the equipment, to ensure it's in compliance. And what you're doing on a regular basis, Mike, through those surveys will be incorporated within this. Early on in Diana's presentation, she spoke to that. And so when the local boards go out and do their certification, they're going to ensure that those surveys have been done, that any recommendations have been complied with, or have a plan for compliance. And so it's certainly going to be a part of this. Now, one piece that is up for discussion is right now there are a number of entities doing EO-type surveys, so is it really a good use of resources for multiple instances of the same type of or very similar survey to be done? So we want to continue those discussions at the work group level and with our agency partners to see what the best way to attack that is. And if one has already done it, will the other already, accept that first survey as long as it meets all of their requirements, so that we don't have to do this multiple times. And then when the board comes in, they see that it's been done at least once on the appropriate timeline. Now, the other acronym that I mentioned was EEO officer, and that's a hiring type term, a human resource term. It's equal employment opportunity. While we find customers jobs, while we find businesses that need our customers to hire them, we are not in the business necessarily of EEO activities. We don't, dictate to our staff how businesses should be hiring according to those regulations. So I just want to make that as much clear to our local area staff, our staff here at OET, and that they are different, and so we want to make sure we're using the right term. EO officers are looking at accessibility to ensure all of our services and information is available to anybody that wants to utilize it, and EO is a hiring human resources type term. So hopefully that answered your question, Mike.
Yes, it did. Thank you.
No, well, and I want to just add, in simpler terms, EO is very broad, and EEO is specific to hiring. But the other thing that I think is very important, since we have, lots of our board staff, that is a new function and requirement of the local boards as well as the state board to ensure that we have that equal opportunity access in all of our centers and affiliates. So, which is a discussion, as we've all talked about, in what does that responsibility really mean, sorry.
Okay, and then Arthur, to your point, certainly the accessibility to all of our services should be in place to address all of our populations, regardless of if they have a barrier or not, and regardless of what that barrier is. So the population you're speaking, we in fact had a discussion recently to try and add additional information to the Illinois WorkNet site that addresses those individuals with records that are reentering the system. And so from a local perspective, as far as accessibility goes and ensuring services are available, it may look different in each local area. So those discussions might be a little bit different, but certainly the basics of information and availability of those services should be there.
And Arthur, I also would like to offer, every Wednesday we do have webinars on various topics, and I think this would be a great topic to talk about, the whole service spectrum of people with criminal records, and, one's the type of resources that are available with them, and then, what's the appropriate way to address those issues, because I know we have, which I'm going to throw this term out here that, some of you aren't going to recognize, but BandaBox, and it's about how you, and I don't know, Art, if you want to kind of just mention what BandaBox is, since I threw a term out some won't be familiar with.
Yeah, thanks, and good morning to everybody. Indeed, BandaBox was a collaborative effort from lawmakers, from advocates, and the mayor, the governor, et cetera. And basically what it does for Illinois and the city of Chicago is that initial application that one fills out and that question that's on there asks if you've ever been convicted of a crime or if you've been arrested. That question is now should not be on the initial application when a candidate is applying for a job. However, once an employer determines that person is a person of interest, they want to hire that person, then on the following that, after the interview, if they want to hire that person, then that employer can then proceed to do a background check. But the key for BandaBox is allowing an individual that may be highly skilled, definitely job ready, credentialed, whatever the criteria it may be, that person now has an opportunity to sit in front of a hiring manager or the HR department and show that they have the skills, show that they have the soft skills, show that they can articulate, and they are a person, as opposed to getting eliminated simply based on what's on their initial application.
Thanks, Art, for explaining that, and then we'll follow up after this session about doing a targeted session just for criminals with people with criminal records. Sorry.
Thank you so much. Any other comments before we move to the kind of finale of Diana's presentation? Okay. Thank you again for all of your input.
Very helpful. And on to the finale. Just a few more slides here. We have 3 continuous improvement criteria that were so interrelated, we thought we'd just bundle them into this slide. So in the course of developing the criteria and the indicators that we'll be using to measure whether or not they've been received, many examples of best practices have been collected, both from other states as well as ones that Illinois has been generating over the number of years. So as we go through this initial certification, but more importantly, as we look to the future, we will make these best practice opportunities available to the local WIBs, and they can use them as kind of conversation starters to think about what areas they would like to continue to work on and continue to excel at. So the customer feedback is something that we suspect is taking place in most, if not all, local workforce areas currently, but we need to start with basic data and to understand who's using the services and what is their perception of the effectiveness and other characteristics of those services. Then we need to look at an evaluation of the entire operation, focusing on its efficiency and effectiveness. And the work group is recommending that the state develop a evaluation framework that would provide these key research questions, kind of evaluation questions, what data they would use and how to use it, and then just methods of determining how effective your operations are. So depending on how soon we can get that evaluation approach or template or framework in place will drive what we can expect of the one-stops by July 1st. But it's something we want to work very closely with the IWIB on as well and take suggestions from all of you. The third one is improving performance, and that's the whole point of continuous improvement, and ensuring that the data that's being collected is making its way to the local board and that they have an opportunity to review it and to translate it and think about what implications that has for their centers. So all of this good information on continuous improvement opportunities will be compiled and included in this process at the appropriate point. All right, and just to kind of provide a little segue to Lisa's presentation, in terms of what's next, so it's very clear, July 1st is the big date. We're still trying to figure out whether and how to include these continuous opportunities in the certification tool. It may be kind of overloading it, but we'll come up with a good approach there. And we will continue to refine the criteria as we translate these criteria into on-site tools to use. I'm sure we'll be uncovering some redundancies or some clarifications that are needed. And then again, as you implement the certification process, you'll come up with ideas about how it can be strengthened or made more realistic. And then finally, there are a handful of tools that the state will be needing to develop in collaboration with the LWIBs and the IWIB. So just two quick final points. What has clearly surfaced throughout these conversations is that this is not an exercise in gotcha. We really want to see every one-stop approved for good reason, but we need to ensure that a basic quality standard is in place for all of the state's one-stops. And then finally, as we develop these on-site tools and as the various supports that are needed are being developed, we're going to have to continually keep an eye to what's practical and feasible by July 1st. And if some centers have some findings, that's something that occurs to everyone at some point in time. You know, the approach is to work with you to make sure that they get corrected quickly and kind of get you set up for operation on July 2nd. Let's see, my final slide is just, I think we've been pretty good about kind of collecting your suggestions. If there's anything else that you want to weigh in on before we shift over to Lisa's presentation, we'd love to have your comments and feedback.
Excellent. Thank you, Diana. Please forward those on to her at that email address. We'd like to go ahead and move into the next segment of the presentation or webinar today, which is on one-stop operator procurement. There is a training and employment guidance letter, 15-16, that came out within the last couple of weeks. It's in the files pod in the bottom left. You should go ahead and access that, download it, or You can actually go, I'm going to put a website into the chat pod where you can go to get the document directly. Also, this second website is where you can go for all documents. In fact, when this 15-16 was issued several weeks ago, there were several additional Tegels that were issued. So you might want to go to the overall site to look for all of those other ones. But I just wanted to provide you with the one specific to procurement so that you can go to the requirements. And Lisa's going to talk about much of what's in that Tegel, but not all of it. So certainly you'll want to go to get the additional information. So with that, I will turn it over to Lisa for the procurement discussion.
Well, thanks, everyone, and I want to thank Diana and Mark for really helping us walk through what we're looking at for recommendations for the actual one-stop certification. And I'm really just going to go over real broad highlights. I think the recommendation that we've had discussions with, we had a small working group, a subset of the policy work group to talk about procurement or begin the conversation, and we're really just looking at how closely following the Tegel as much as possible. And at this point, I don't foresee anybody really adding a lot of criteria onto that, because that really is an individualized approach. So, but I think the significant change that we all are aware of is that we're now required to procure the one-stop operator. Under WIOA, WIA, that was an option, and again, it's no longer an option, and it's the board's responsibility, the local board's responsibility to procure that one-stop operator, and then also to make sure that the functions that they're performing are consistent with the federal laws and state policy. And then it's the larger IWIB to help not only set the direction for certification, but also the general guidance for the one-stop operator. And just for, just as a reminder, here's what the one-stop operator is doing. It's the overall management of the one-stop center, coordinating with partners, and service delivery. And there is some guidance about how the one-stop operator is selected. It has to be a competitive process, as we just said. The Tegel that Mark referenced has a lot of information about that competitive process. We did give you the legislative reference that supports the competitive process. The law also says, and the regulations, that it's not less than every 4 years. And then again, we just reiterate the Tegel that has additional information. And there is the requirement that it's existing and new one-stop operators have to be competitively selected by July 1st. And so we're really wanting to ramp up any guidance that we will be providing, or the guidance that we will be providing, to make sure that you all can sufficiently get your procurement needs met, because we know that, some of us have more stringent and more cumbersome, quite frankly, procurement processes to go through. And if there has been a board that has released their RFP to procure their one-stop operator, make sure that you compare it to the Tegel and any guidance, because if you did not follow the new process, that contract has to be terminated in accordance with, and executed or re-executed in accordance with WIOA. Who can be an operator? This basically follows or reinforces what we did previously, a public, private, or not-for-profit, and then a consortium can also be the operator, and you can select 3 or more partners from this list. And you can also be an operator can also be staffed to the local board. However, in the instance of the local board applying to be the actual operator, there has to be an outside entity like the state to help select the proper operator. Yeah. Are you going to go forward? Okay, that's fine. All right. who cannot be an operator, can't be an elementary or secondary school, with the exception of a non-traditional secondary school or area career and tech ed schools. Here are the specific roles that are outlined for the one-stop operator. I think these are pretty basic, and currently what you all have been doing, those that are one-stop operators on the call, these are certainly all of your roles, but just to reiterate them, because there are some things that have changed or are highlighted within the law and the regulations that one-stop operators can't do. And I don't really necessarily need to go through all of those because they're up there and they follow the guidance. So here are some other things that are part of the role of the one-stop. And then we've already talked about, I just want to point out the bottom one, you need to follow regulations around the EO responsibilities and physical and programmatic accessibility. So that's something certainly that as an example, in your RFP process, you need to ensure that you get information on how that's going to be handled by the one-stop operator. Here's some other roles that you all as a board can consider putting in your RFPs and asking the one-stop operators to do. Certainly career services, youth program services, allowing fee for service, outreach and recruitment, and you can kind of see this list too, so we don't really have to go through it. But I would suggest that when you're thinking about for your local area, what is it that we really, the expectation of what we want our center to do, certainly you can go beyond what the roles are. Here's what the one-stop operator may not do, and I really want to stress this because unfortunately I can't speak to how this might have occurred necessarily under WIA, but it definitely cannot happen under WIOA, and that is convening system stakeholders on development of regional and local plans. Certainly the one-stop operators can participate in that activity and should, quite frankly, but certainly they can't be the lead on it. They also cannot prepare and submit local plans. That's a responsibility of the board to take on that. Of course, they can't provide oversight of themselves. And, another no-brainer, not manage or participate in the competitive selection, including writing the RFP. And I think that's an important point, is that the board has to make sure that that there's a separation from existing one-stop operators in participating in the writing of the RFP. The other one is negotiating performance accountability measures. That is a board function and staff to the board function rather than the actual one-stop operator. And that's specifically for, let me clarify, for the adult dislocated worker and youth activities, because the other partners at the state level will be working on what their performance accountability measures are, but that certainly doesn't mean that they shouldn't be sharing that information with the board. And then, of course, submitting the budget for activities of the board has to make sure it's at the board level. Here's some procurement requirements, and I'm just going to run through these, and you probably are all going to have quite a few, or some of you are going to have quite a few questions on procurement. We'll take those questions and then bring those not just to the work group, but to our fiscal team as well, and then get guidance back out to you all. And, we've already talked about it being full and open. The principles of the OMB Uniform Administrative Guidance, that is addressed in the TEGL. I think the TEGL is very important as you develop your RFPs that you have next to you. And then, we mentioned or touched on your own local procurement policies that you all have to go through as well. Considerations that you also need to think about and definitely include in your RFP process and the selections, making sure that there is a delineation of duties in a written agreement with the CEO and the local board, disclosing any conflicts of interest The operator may not create disincentives to those with barriers. You know, you have to use the most restrictive procurement policy. And then, you know, and again, complying with federal regulations relating to calculation and use of profits. Okay. Is that it? So that's, I guess that ends my presentation. I'm used to talking a little bit longer. So if you have questions about the one-stop procurement, again, please put them in the chat pod because we're still sort of like working through some of these issues. Yes, I do see a question that says, will we make an RFP template? We are looking into that. And you can use it or not use it. It's not going to be a requirement at all. So that would be something that we would consider and make available to anybody that would want it. And just to reinforce, we do know that time is of the essence, so we do want to ramp this particular piece up. So I'm going to turn this back over to Mark or Diana for final thoughts.
Diana, if you have any final thoughts?
No, actually. I think I am grateful to the work group and to Commerce for its leadership, and look forward to what comes next. We do take all of your comments and suggestions very seriously, so be assured that we'll have robust conversations around all the ideas that you share with us. And thanks for the opportunity to share.
Okay. So once these work groups are done, they will decide on policy to be issued, whether it be issued through, for this instance, it'll be issued by the board. And I just want to reiterate, we had a webinar several months back. We rolled out a new website for all of our policy that's issued through the state board as well as through Title 1B. I'm going to place that link into the chat pod so that you can all go there, and when we get these policies issued, you'll be able to see what exactly is contained in them. So just one second. And then the second thing I want to put a link to is for all of these webinars when we hold them on Wednesdays. I'm glad to see all the people we had join us today. I recognize many names, but I see a lot that I don't recognize, so I anticipate some of those are from the local boards and CEOs that we just aren't seeing on our webinars on a regular basis. We do have these not necessarily every Wednesday, but on a pretty routine basis. We'll continue including you in notifications for those. But if you're unable to attend any one of those webinars, we do place them on the Illinois WorkNet website, and so I'm going to place that website in here so you can go and see all of the past webinars that have been presented. You might find a topic relevant to what you're researching or interested in. So go there, see what we've provided. Continue to keep that link at your ready so you can see webinars that we provide in the future. I imagine, especially with these two topics, we're going to need to present at least one, if not more, webinars to continue informing everybody of the work group activities and the, I guess, the agreed upon criteria and procurement process that the state board and local boards finalize.
I do see a question about the outside entity, like the state. You know, we can certainly entertain that, but that also allows, the regulations also allow for you all to establish an outside entity. So you know, that's a discussion that you all have, you know, within your local board. And then another question about proceeding. Certainly, with the release of the TEGL, I think it would be acceptable for you, you know, to start moving ahead, just, you know, with the understanding that we may be providing additional guidance, but again, at this point, there's not really been a lot of discussion about that. But as far as certification, you know, that's really, you know, we have not issued final recommendations on that. So I would caution, you know, proceeding too fast. Oh, I'm sorry. Laura corrected me. You're asking about the designation. We are going to begin conversations with the board around the redesignation of the local workforce areas. A lot to do.
Yeah, as Lisa just said, we have a lot going on, so we'll be, with multiple work groups refining, revising, and finalizing all of these requirements, and especially for these two topics today. But again, I'll reiterate that if anyone from the state or local boards or the CEOs that have joined us would like to join us in those conversations, we would welcome you to continue to provide us input from the local level or the state level as to the final criteria or processes. Please get your names to Diana if you are interested. And again, if you come upon some ideas for further comments or questions on today's webinar, please forward those to Diana. I want to thank her, Diana, and Lisa for their presentations today. I want to thank everyone, especially our board members, our chairs, and our CEOs for joining us today. And everyone, please have a good day, and we will talk to you soon. Bye.